Hello Factorio fans! This video provides a brief overview of Bob's mods to the game. If you're like me and have played the base game dozens of times, you're probably up for a new challenge. Bob's mods provide that in spades, adding significant amounts of complexity and realism to the game. This is Factorio on steroids. However, there are so many changes it can be overwhelming at first. Here are the top 10 things I wish I knew before diving into playing these fantastic mods. A quick aside on installing the mods. There are a laundry list of Bob's mods, which to install. I recommend them all. Many build on one another, and this overview assumes that you have them all. Tip number 1. Take a minute to get familiar with the new submenus. One of the first things you'll probably notice when you start Factorio with Bob's mods is that there are 5 new submenus to your crafting window. It takes a little while to get used to them and where things are, but let's take a brief look at each one. Logistics is where you'll find all your belts, inserters, pipes, as well as some but not all logistic and construction robot items. Pipes can now be made from a variety of materials, not just iron. Fluids. Chemistry plays a big role in Bob's mods, and most of the stuff you'll brew will be found here. Though it will have to be made in a chemical plant or electrolyzer, you can't make these by hand, obviously. Materials. There are a ton of new metals and other items that you'll create. Most of what you'll create from ores are found in this submenu. But note that the stuff from the base game, like iron and copper, are still in their original menus. Intermediate products is kind of the other catch-all submenu and is the home to the all-important electric boards, which we will talk about later. Finally, there is a gemstone submenu. Gemstones are used in a variety of advanced weaponry. You'll probably also notice that there are a ton more items in some of the old submenus. Don't get overwhelmed. Most of these are just advanced versions of familiar items. For example, there are now 5 levels of assembling machine, but they're the same assembling machines that you're familiar with. And there are 5 versions of pump jacks, and so on and so forth. Tip number 2, I recommend staying organized in your factory layout. These mods add a lot of complexity, so if you just try to wing your factory design as you go, you'll probably quickly be frustrated. I recommend using a central bus system to move raw materials around your factory. I would recommend 15 belts on this bus, 7 on one side, 8 on the other, with plenty of room for fluids in the middle. The good news is that with all these new ores, you'll probably never need more than 1 belt for any specific kind. I recommend a full dedicated belt for copper, iron, and aluminum, but half a belt is fine for all the rest. With 5 levels of speedy belts, you can move a lot on 1 belt. I tend to put science pack production on one side and electric card production on the other, but you can organize it however you want. Tip number 3, do all of your smelting centrally. Bob's Mods takes the original 6 raw material inputs, copper, iron, coal, steel, uranium, and crude oil, and adds about 15 more. So you'll be seeing lots of new colors on your map screen. In generic Factorio, there's a case to be made for smelting at the ore site. But in Bob's Mods, it's too complex, particularly because there are chemicals involved in some smelting operations. For example, steel now requires oxygen and is done in an electric chemical furnace. Tip number 4, don't search for cobalt. You won't find it out here in your map. Cobalt is unique in that it is derived from processing copper in an advanced process. You will eventually discover tech for advanced copper refining, and this will output cobalt, which will allow you to make your cobalt plates and so forth. As a side note, it's a logical idea to place your copper and cobalt smelting operations next to each other, and there are a few other logical neighbors as well. Iron and steel are obvious. Brass requires zinc, so you might as well co-locate those. Titanium and silicon both require carbon and calcium chloride in their refining process, so it makes sense to keep them in the same vicinity. Don't worry if you don't know what all these materials are, you'll discover them as you go through the game. Tip number 5, plan ahead for aluminum. A heads up that aluminum will become a crucial component in the late game, much more so than any other input. It's used extensively in rocket components as well as the most advanced science packs that you will produce. So leave lots of room for smelting it. Tip number 6, inserters are now awesomely flexible. I love this mod. This is one of my favorites. There are no long inserters in Bob's mods. Instead, any inserter can now pick up and put down from up to 3 spaces away. For example, this inserter reaches over several spaces to pick up lead, pivots 90 degrees, and places it on the belt. Use the new button in the upper left corner to configure inserters. The pickup tile position is specified on the left. Where you want it to drop is next over, and you can even tell it which side of a belt you want it to drop items on. You'll need to research some technologies to add these flexible features as you progress through the game, but this is a fantastic mod. Tip number 7, sulfur now comes from petroleum refining. You'll eventually need sulfur to create science packs. There are now actually 7 different science packs that you'll be working on. The first, yellow, is exactly the same as red in the base game with the same inputs. This means that the start to the game is pretty much the same as generic Factorio. You'll focus on smelting copper and iron and getting electricity to get basic research up and running. This helps ease you into all of the changes mid-game. The second science pack, red, is exactly the same as green in the base game. Why Bob decided to change colors on these is a mystery to me. Why not keep red red instead of making green red, but that's the way he made it. The next one, blue, will require sulfur. Sulfur can either be produced directly at the refinery, and you can belt it in, or you can produce sulfur dioxide as an output to refining and change that into sulfur at the factory. As you can tell, I prefer the second option. Petroleum refining actually becomes less important in Bob's mods, and so you can actually plan for a smaller refinery space than you might have done in generic Factorio. Tip number 8, plan for scale when you're manufacturing electric boards. As you begin to build your base, you'll quickly find that you need basic electronic boards, these yellow boards, to build things like filter inserters, solar panels, and electric engines. Electric boards are where the game is at its most complex and, in my opinion, the most fun. Boards are much more complex than in generic Factorio. There are now 4 different types of boards, which can be found under intermediate products: yellow, red, blue, and pink. And each of these electric boards have a circuit board on which they get printed. So they are conveniently color-coded the same way, but the finished boards are over here on the right. The circuit boards are over here on the left. A little hard to tell those icons apart. Each circuit board, in turn, has a type of board on which it relies. For yellow, that is a wooden board. For red, it is a phenolic board, which is a resin board, also made from wood. And for blue and pink, it is a fiberglass board, which is made from plastic and glass. Most of the rest of the components that go into these electric boards are made here in this row, with the exception of silicon wafers, which are over on the materials tab. Designing the portions of the factory that make these boards is where I think the game is one of the most fun, so I'll let you do that on your own. But I do recommend that you design board manufacturing for scale. You use a lot of these things. I find that 4 assembly machines for yellow, 6 each for red and blue, and another 4 for pink usually do the trick for me, but it'll depend on how big you want your factory to be. Tip number 9, modules or cards have been completely revamped. The modules you'll use to make the various parts of your factory faster, more efficient, and more productive have been completely changed. They are significantly more complex to manufacture and are kind of a separate factory and research operation unto themselves. First, it's important to note that the technology to discover the various cards doesn't use science packs. It uses the components of the cards themselves. So for example, to research a speed module, I'll need 25 of these speed circuit boards. Second, discovery of these technologies is done in a completely separate lab. Confusingly, these modules labs look exactly like regular labs, and they are found next to each other on the same crafting tab. But they are very different. The modules lab accepts the various card components which are used to discover card technologies. Third, as you get more advanced, you'll be able to combine different cards into single cards. So for example, to make what in the base game would be a green efficiency module, which reduces power consumption and pollution, you'll combine efficiency modules and pollution cleaning modules to create a green module, which confusingly is colored yellow. All of this takes a bit of time to wrap your head around, but once you do, you'll find that you can make some really powerful cards if you want to devote the time and manufacturing capacity to it. And last but not least, tip number 10, consider adding the bulk rail loader mod. This is actually not a Bob's mod, but I find it very useful. It allows for very rapid loading and unloading of ores and provides a giant storage space at your main train base. I just find both of these very useful considering all of the new ores, and it simplifies train logistics quite a lot. That covers the basics. Again, if you're an advanced Factorio player, Bob's Mods is truly the next level, and I highly recommend it. Welcome and enjoy. And a big thank you to Bob, whoever you are, for creating such truly amazing mods. Happy factoring.